I think there's like 75 verses to this thing. It's amazing, extra long. And we won't read the entire chapter tonight. But we're also not going to stay in chapter 26, so we'll probably bump into chapter 27. That's going to be a fun night. So buckle your seatbelts. So as I was reading this a couple weeks ago and just kind of preparing for this past week, I really came to a thought. Obviously, it's in the context of the chapter, but I want to preach for the next 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes on betrayal. On betrayal. Obviously, we're talking about Judas Iscariot, but we're going to read some here. We're going to read some things here about Judas that really nobody wants to be considered one who betrayed. No one wants to be a betrayer. No one wants to be the Judas Iscariot. No one wants to be No one wants to be the turncoat. When we look at Judas's life, Judas was counted with the 12. He was counted with the 70. He was counted as a friend of Jesus. Jesus even called him friend. Now, I think that word is important. I think that when you look at that and you say, hey, someone's a friend, I think that word's important. I think that it's important to see who Jesus called friend. Because in John, Jesus said, greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his what? For his friends. So Jesus loved Judas to death. Literally. And you stop and think about all that Judas was and all that how he betrayed Christ, yet Jesus loved him. Even at the point of betrayal, Jesus acknowledged him as a friend. That says a lot about Christ's attitude, knowing full well that he was being betrayed, because we read this passage, you see that he was going to be betrayed. In fact, let's go right down to verse number 14. Let's get down to verse number 14. Let me read the verse number 1 and 2 real quickly. There's really no way to get past bouncing around. So let me read some verses. We'll come back to verse 14 in a second. And it came to pass when Jesus had finished all these sayings, he said unto his disciples, ye know that after 2 days is the feast of the Passover, and the Son of Man is betrayed to be crucified. So he says, I'm going to be betrayed. Then assembled together the chief priests and the scribes and the elders of the people unto the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and consulted that they might take Jesus by subtlety, can't say it, it's kind of sneaky, and kill him. But they said, not on the feast days, lest there be an uproar among the people. It's good that they want to do it on a feast day, because, they don't want to shed innocent blood on a feast day. That's pretty good to do. And we can find that in verse number 5, they want to do it because they didn't want to do it on a feast day, so they want to be an uproar among the people. Go down to verse number 14. Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went unto the chief priests, and said unto them, what will ye give me, and I will deliver him unto you? And they covenanted with him for 30 pieces of silver. And from that time he sought opportunity to betray him. Now the first day of the feast of the unleavened bread, the first day of the feast of the unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying unto him, where wilt thou that we prepare for thee to eat the Passover? Verse number 18, and he said, go into the city and to such a man, and say unto him, the Master saith that my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at thy house with my disciples. Verse number 21. And they did eat, and he said, they didn't eat, he said, and as they did eat, he said, verily I say unto you, that one of you shall betray me. And they were exceeding sorrowful, and began every one of them to say unto him, Lord, is it I? And he answered and said, he that dippeth his hand with me in the dish, the same shall betray me. Well, who is, that's kind of an open-ended thing, because everybody was going to dip their hand into the dish. So Christ didn't specify again who was going to do it. Verse number 12, verse 24, the Son of Man goeth as it is written of him, but woe unto that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It had been good for that man if he had not been born. Then Judas, which betrayed him, answered and said, Master, is it I? He said unto him, Thou hast said. And as they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed it and brake it and gave it to the disciples and said, Take, eat, this is my body. And he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, Drink ye all of it, for this is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. But I say unto you, I will not drink henceforth of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. Obviously, there's another passage dealing with the same subject where the Bible says that that hour Satan entered into Judas. That Satan entered into Judas. Go down to verse number 31. Then saith Jesus unto them, All ye shall be offended because of me this night, for it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered abroad. But after I am risen again, I will go before you into Galilee. Peter answered and said unto him, Though all men shall be offended because of thee, yet will I never be offended. Jesus saith unto him, Verily I say unto thee, that this night before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. Peter said unto him, Though I should die with thee, yet will I not deny thee. Likewise also said all the disciples. Skip down to verse number 46. Rise and let us be going. Behold, he is at hand that doth betray me. Verse 47. And while he yet spake, lo, Judas, one of the 12, came with him, and with him a great multitude with swords and staves from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now he that betrayed him gave them a sign, saying, Whomsoever I shall kiss, the same as he, hold him fast. Did they really not think they knew who Jesus was? He was pretty much on the, America's, on Jerusalem's most wanted posters. They knew who he was, but why did Judas have to say, the one I signify, that I'm going to, betray with a kiss, that's the one. I think everybody kind of knew it, but I think Judas wanted to have his 30 seconds of spotlighted fame. Look at verse 49. And forthwith he came to Jesus and said, Hail, Master, and kissed him. And Jesus said unto him, Friend, wherefore art thou come? Then came they and laid hands on Jesus and took him. And behold, one of them, which were with Jesus, stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck a servant of the high priest and smote off his ear. Then said Jesus unto him, Put up again thy sword unto his place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Thinkest thou that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then shall the scriptures be fulfilled that thus it must be? Go down to chapter number 27. When the morning was come, all the chief priests and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, and they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate the governor, then Judas, which had betrayed him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself, and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned in all that I have betrayed, and I have sinned in that I have betrayed the innocent blood. And they said, What is that to us? See thou to that. And he cast down the pieces of silver in the temple, and departed, and went and hanged himself. And the chief priest took silver pieces and said, It is not lawful, well, now you care, for to put them into treasury, because it is the price of blood. And they took counsel, and bought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in. Wherefore that field was called the field of blood unto this day. Then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremy the prophet, saying, And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him that was valued, whom the children of Israel did value, and gave him for the potter's field, as the Lord appointed me. When you think about betrayal, there's a lot of verses we read, but when you stop and think about betrayal, there's some things that jump out about betrayal. First of all, betrayal is predictable. Christ foretold his betrayal. Christ knew he was going to be betrayed. In fact, Jeremy the prophet, Jeremiah, prophesied the betrayal. David, in the book of Psalms, prophesied about the betrayal. Zechariah prophesied about the betrayal. When you stop and think about betrayal, it's predictable. It shouldn't be surprising that betrayal takes place. In the book of Matthew, in chapter 24, you remember Jesus was prophesying about the end times, about the end of the world, when when the temple's going to get destroyed, the end of the world, the Lord's coming. He says in that day, there's going to be people, they're going to be betraying one another. They're going to be, turning you to the council, killing one another. Betrayal is not something that we should ever take surprisingly. But just because it's predictable, it can be avoidable. Have you been to a church before where there's been a church split? And the people who split the church are usually the ones who are closest to the pastor or closest to the involvement of the church, and they were serving in the church, and wow, I never saw this coming. Well, that's the part of being human. It's predictable. Church splits happen not because people don't see the long term; they see the short term. There's always the potential of, hey, new leadership. There's always the potential of getting your way and the colored carpet, getting your way and whether or not this pastor has liberty to preach from the pulpit, or whatever there's ever been a church split, whatever there's ever been a problem, it's always been where it's been avoidable, but it's predictable. I mean, think about it. Enemies don't betray you. Friends do. And I could ask this by a show of hands, but how many of us have ever been betrayed by a friend? I have. I've been betrayed by friends. I've been betrayed by family. That hurts. Betrayal happens. I think of husbands and wives that have been living years together, and then that husband goes off and has an affair, the wife goes off and has an affair, and the betrayal. The heart-wrenching betrayal that takes place. It's predictable. That's why there's laws. That's why there's commandments against adultery. That's why there's commandments about it, because God doesn't want adultery. God doesn't want truce breakers. God doesn't want to have betrayal. But you know what? If God puts out commandments and puts out rules and guidelines against something, it's because we're prone to do it. Is anybody else here roasting like a chicken? Yeah, me too. Ben, can you knock that down about, I don't know, whatever degrees it is? Use your discretion. Don't make us all, cold turkeys. See that pun? Was it cold?
Now.
Huh?
It's 70 now.
Perfect. What was it on?
73. I think.
But betrayal is predictable. Sunday, for instance, I went out soul winning, left my wife and my kids here in the church. My wife locked the door like we always do on Sunday afternoons. I left, came back. In that time, my wife turned off the air conditioning. She turned off the heat. And I know she did it. And I was going to turn it on. I was going to adjust it. And I told myself, no, we're going to come in here on Wednesday because I know it's supposed to snow. And it's going to be a cold building. And I knew this. But I wanted to let my wife know that her actions of turning off the heating system, or the air conditioning system, the climate control system in this building was going to come at a high cost. And I just want to know, when you guys came in today, was the building cold? Mm-hmm. Your evil deeds betrayed yourself. But anyways, but betrayal is predictable. It's something that we do. It's. I expect one day. I predict one day that one of you will betray the church. I hope not for it. It's totally avoidable. But I predict one day that one of us is going to betray the church. It may be me. I may betray the church. Maybe by doctrine, by sin, by conduct, by association. The Bible says that offense must come to the world, right? But woe by whom the offense cometh. There's going to be offenses. There's going to be problems. There's going to be dismay. There's going to be feuds. But woe be to the one by whom they come. Betrayal is totally predictable. And it's unavoidable. It's avoidable. Judas could have avoided it. He was trusted with the purse. He was trusted as a treasure. And let me tell you something about treasures. People who handle the money. But Judas had that purpose. Judas had that. Oh, hi, Sarah. But anyways, Judas had that opportunity to not betray, but he did, and it was prophesied that one would. It was avoidable. Judas wasn't bound by a will. God didn't predestine Judas to hell. God didn't predestine Judas to be the betrayer. God didn't predestine anyone to sin. That's a wrong, false, wicked doctrine. God doesn't deceive. We understand that, right? God doesn't deceive. Satan deceives. In whom the God of this world has blinded the minds of them that believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ should shine unto them, and they get saved, right? So they don't want. God doesn't deceive. God doesn't blind the hearts and minds of men. Satan gives us strong delusions, not God. Anybody who gets up and openly preaches that God, or openly states that God deceives people, they got a really bad view of God, that God is now the author of sin. God allows sin, but God's not the author of sin. It was very possible for Judas not to betray Christ, but he did out of his own free will. So betrayal is predictable. Number 2, betrayal is usually politically motivated. But I mean politically motivated. I'm not talking about the powers that be and the what's that group of people, Illuminati and all this. It's not the Democrats, Republicans, or Senate and Congress, or the military might, or it's about popularity, like the political. It's always got an agenda. There's always something behind the scenes. There's always someone trying to push an agenda. When I say political, I mean agenda-based. Everybody's got an agenda. Everybody's got an agenda. Betrayal is usually politically motivated. People always have some kind of agenda going on. But here you find in chapter 26 that the chief priests, the elders, the scribes, all these guys got together that were politically motivated to put Christ to death. It was not a plan, it was not just a unforeseen, it wasn't something that was done secretly either. It wasn't done where people didn't know, because Judas knew where to go and betray Christ at. Jesus went to the scribes, to the Pharisees. They went. It wasn't like some kind of secret meeting. Judas knew where they were at. It was understood that they were trying to put Christ to death. And they were trying to do it sneakily. They're trying to do it subtly. They're trying to do it on the sly. They're trying to do things where it's going to be publicly known, but everybody knew they wanted Christ put to death. I mean, there was already times where Christ was being bombarded and rushed to make the kingdom. There was actually times that they pick up stones to stone Christ. John chapter 8. They're going to try stoning Christ. It wasn't by, hey, what are you doing with these stones? I don't know. I just got so mad. They knew full well they were trying to put Christ to death all along. They're always trying to find him in fault. And by the way, when they did find him and accused him of blasphemy, he didn't commit blasphemy. He was innocent of the charge of blasphemy because it was true. But betrayal is usually politically motivated. There's always a reason why someone is being betrayed. There's always a reason why one person will trade unto another person. It's usually their agenda. There's a reason why one day, God forbid, but one day that I may turn on Bob. Or that Bob may turn on Gabriel. Or that Ben may one day turn on Josh. There's that one day, we don't know exactly why, but there's always an agenda to why. There's always an agenda. For Judas, it was money. Judas wanted 30 pieces of silver, but it wasn't worth it. The Pharisees and scribes and the chief priests, they wanted Jesus dead because of agenda. They didn't like that he preached against their authority in chapter 23, chapter 24, chapter 25. They didn't like that he preached openly and harshly against their agenda. And so their agenda responded with betrayal. One minute they call him master. Is it I? Jesus calls him a friend. These are not terms we throw out loosely. These are terms that were like, hey, you're my teacher. I'm your student, master, teacher, rabbi. I'm learning from you. I'll throw the term out here as well, pastor. And the ones that will often use the word pastor, the ones that are closest to the pastor are usually the ones that will lead the charge. And it's hard. It's heartbreaking to think that. But betrayal is usually politically motivated. By the way, betrayal is something that God can even forgive. There's only one sin that God won't forgive. Betrayal is something that God will forgive, but how oftentimes when we get betrayed, do we X that person out of our life? I remember this one time, my wife and I, we were in New York, and my wife and I were looking at, we were praying about stepping aside a year before we left. And I was praying about it, and I remember talking to a fellow preacher about it. And he came by one day, and I was just there, and I was like, look, I just want to let you know I'm seriously praying about God moving me out of this church. And I don't know, the church was doing great. I mean, the church was 60, 65 people, souls were getting saved, baptized. It was just, things were just going up. Finances were astronomically great. Fellowship was sweet. We were in a really good position. We were debt-free. I mean, it was a really good position. And I'm like, I believe it's time I believe it's time for me to step aside. We just got the building program. We just finished building the building. And I told this preacher, and I told him, I said, I believe that God is moving us aside. I'm praying to see what God would have us to do next. But right now I'm just kind of praying and finding out when I'm supposed to resign. The pastor started to take that conversation, this preacher friend of mine started taking this conversation and began to manipulate my life and his life, that I would take his church. And one of the crucial points of the discussion was, before we go any further towards this, we got to make sure you talk to your support system, your family, and because they were his family was his counselors. I said, talk to your counsel, and I'll talk to my counsel, and we'll pray about it. And everything he told me was sweet as butter. Everything he told me was sweet as butter. But then when it came down for the time to come to a church vote at his church of whether or not they would consider him stepping aside and me coming in, he never told his family. And it was very conditional that before we could go any further, he had to talk to his family. And he never did. And I felt betrayed. Because I was open and honest in every step that I made, even within the church, even with the people, even the leadership of the church. I let them know. I said, I believe God is moving me on. There's a possibility we may move to a church up the road. I'm letting you know we're praying about it, but I'm letting you know first and foremost, I'm still here every Sunday, still going to soul winning every week, still every Wednesday I'm still here for hospital visits, I'm still here for counseling, I'm still praying for you, I'm still taking care of the day-to-day affairs of the church, but I'm just letting you know that I believe that God is, from what it seems like, God is leading up the road. And then when I found out the rug got ripped out from under my feet and the wool got pulled from my eyes, I realized I'd been betrayed, and it hurt. I remember it tore me up for a long time, and I cut this person out of my life for a good 2-3 years because I felt betrayed. He lied to me. He deceived me, and I deceived many because of his deception. I felt betrayed. Earlier this year, this past couple weeks, the preacher friend was traveling through the area. I met up with him, put a tank of gas in his car. I paid for his hotel. I paid for his dinner, and I got it. We got it. I addressed it. I was like, "Look, you deceived me. You betrayed me." I said, "I'm just letting you know that was wrong." But he was politically motivated. It wasn't something just by happenstance. He had a purpose of why he was doing it. He knew his family would say no, but he had a politically motivated reason to betray. Betrayal pays pennies to the real price. Judas Iscariot was going to betray Christ for 30 pieces of silver. That's pennies. But when he stopped and realized the price that was paid, he didn't want any part of it. And he tried returning the money. He tried throwing it down the ground. I've heard one preacher say, and it's totally hyperbole, it's totally just kind of taken out of context, but preachers do this sometimes. Not me, of course. But he says, he took that 30 pieces of silver and he threw it on the ground. And it came back in his hand. And he threw it on the ground. And it came back in his hand. And he threw it down on the ground. And it came back in his hand. I'm like, what was it, attached to yo-yo? He's like, what are you talking about? Like, And he goes, and then he got so frustrated he couldn't get rid of it. And he threw it on the ground, and it came back in his hand. And for all of his life, he threw it down, and it came back in his hand. And he couldn't take it anymore. And he went out and hung himself. And I'm like, the Bible says he went immediately out and hung himself. His life must have been immediately short. The whole way there, get off, get off, get off, get off, get off. And I'm like, man, some preachers have really good illustrations, but it ain't biblically sound. But when you think about it, betrayal pays pennies to the real price. What you or I betray someone, when people betray us, it's pennies to the real price. When you think about a friendship and the relationships that we have one with another. I was talking to a lady this past week. She'd been married for 30 years. She had been married for 30 years. She worked and supported her husband going to college. She worked and supported her husband and getting his firm off the ground. She paid and supported her husband through heart surgery. 30 years. He finally gets healthy, gets a heart transplant, gets healthy. His firm is up running. He's got a master's degree. He's doing financially super great. And he goes home one day and he says, I want a divorce. And she felt such bitterness and betrayal and just such anger and such hurt. 30 years of marriage. Just gone. Betrayal. And it's always worth pennies compared to the full price. You think you can find someone who's going to be with you through thick and thin, sacrifice to support you, to stand by you, to be with your dreams, and the minute you're established, you just toss them away? Betrayal. You used me. Betrayal. Heartache. Betrayal. It's always worth pennies compared to the real price. Betraying parties often feign affection in endearing moments just before they betray. Oh, you're the best pastor ever. Aren't you the greatest ever? Coochie coochie coo. Aren't you the cutest pastor? You're just a wonderful pastor. Oh, you preach so wonderful, sound doctrine. That's people stabbing in the back. I remember we were at Countryside, and they had a revival, spring revival meeting. And they had a preacher came in, and one of the nights, which was, I can't stand when evangelists do this, but they called up the pastor and his family up front. Pastor, I'm asking you and your family, come on up. You come on up now. Come on up. Line right here. I'm like, oh, this is going to be sappy. Here it comes. And everybody in the church, you come on by and you love on your pastor. And let him know how much you appreciate him and his sacrifice and love of the Lord that he does here. You come on down up here from front and you hug his pastor, you ladies, you hug his wife's neck. And you come down and you shake their kids' hands and you let your pastor know how much you love and appreciate him. And everybody got up, started filing in behind the pastor, and got in line and hugging the pastor's neck and loving on Pastor Boyle. And the ones that stayed around the longest and spread the most honeypot were the very ones that stood up and betrayed him. Very ones. And I remember sitting back and watching it, and I'm like, oh man, this ain't good. And the guy, the evangelist, one of his buddies, was the guy who led the charge in assaulting the pastor and kicking him out of the church. And I'm like, man, something bad's about to happen. I remember telling Patrick, I said, Pastor Boyle. He's like, oh boy. I said, I said, just watch it. Something bad's going to happen. I don't know when. The next 4 or 6 months, something bad's about to happen. Sure enough, 5 months to the date, something bad happened. The very people that were all smooching and loving and everything else were the very ones. Oftentimes, that time of endearment or affectionate moment, that affection and endearing moments are the ones that do it just before they betray. Be careful of it. Aaron, if you go home tonight and Sarah goes and starts massaging your feet, giving you a nice shoulder massage, brings you a great big platter of quesadillas, gives you a shopping spree for the nearest fish store. I'm just letting you know. Betraying parties. Why am I picking on Sarah so much? I don't know. Betraying parties often feign affection and they have those endearing moments just before they betray. I remember when my wife and I we started this. We starting this church plant in South Venice, Florida. And we've been doing it for 6 months. I was praying about it. Lord, you want to start this church? You got to, like, Lord, I don't want it. Push it away, push it away, push it away. And the Lord was like, start this work. And it was clear to me that it was threefold. Once was either we're going to start a church, or we're going to minister and help these people that were out of church get back to the churches they were into, or God was going to go ahead and shut us down if it was not of God. For 6 months, we saw 45 people saved, at least 45 people saved out door knocking, sewing in church, visitors, 30 people coming to church regularly on Sunday mornings. The Word of God was being preached. Things were just going great. Hang on a second. Things were just going great. And then, the grits hit the pan. And then things went crooked. And then things went crazy. And people started leaving. And it was over the most ridiculous things. Things that were just not even founded. And then it narrowed down and we had a few left. And we were doing great. And all of a sudden, everybody's up and left. But just before everybody up and left, we had a really good service. We had a really good service in mid-February. We had a super fantastic church service. Man, people were just getting their hearts right. And man, it was just a really good sermon. And then we had a good time in fellowship. And it was literally on Sunday. It was fantastic. Thursday night, we had our church service, or Wednesday night, we had our church service and a Bible study church service, and it was just kind of great fellowship. Everything was great. By Saturday night, phone call after phone call after phone call, we're done, we're done, we're done, we're done. Just heart-wrenching. Like, what in the world? All at one shot. Betrayal often feigns affection. The parties usually feign affection and endearing moments just before they betray. Betrayal obviously involves friends. And yet, Christ trusted his friends. Just because someone's going to betray you doesn't mean you can't trust them. Or doesn't mean you still don't love his friends. You know they're going to betray you. You know it. A friend loveth at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. You know that friend's going to love you at all times. When they betray you, you know it's going to happen, but you still love them anyway. And you still are willing to love them even to the point of death. Sydney, stop. And you love them even to the point of death. Just like Jesus did. That he died for Judas. Betrayal is always unsatisfying. It's not just that it pays pennies to the real price, but it's always unsatisfying. It's never what you hope for. People look for that satisfaction, and it ended Judas's life. Betrayal comes in many forms. Betrayal is not speaking up when your friend is being accosted. That's betrayal. Betrayal is not standing up or not speaking out, not coming alongside, not supporting that person who needs your comfort, who needs your consideration, who needs your care, who needs your ear. Just a sounding board, just to listen to. I'll close with a self-deprecating illustration. My wife loves it when I do these things. We were in New York, and my wife and I had been married for 5 years, I think, at the time, 6 years at the time, and our church had a fire, and she was working, and I was working. We were both working crazy because the church could no longer pay any living expense or anything, and we were helping take care of anywhere from 4 to 13 construction workers at a time, and feeding them and providing for them and everything else while they stayed at our house. That was crazy. A 3-bedroom trailer with 13 people. It was like almost like immigrants, but it was kind of crazy. And my wife and I came. We finally had an evening to ourselves. It was like a Friday evening. My wife and I finally had an evening to ourselves, and she just needed an ear. She just needed a sounding board. I was working full-time. I was working 2 part-time jobs, and my wife was working two full-time jobs, and we were just literally doing everything we could, pastoring the church, helping take care of these people. And my wife just needed stress relief. My wife just needed a sounding board. And I turned a deaf ear to her needs. And she just got mad. I remember she got upset. I got upset. She took one car. I took the other. And we just went in two different opposite directions. And we came home that night. We came home around the same time. We came home. We sat down on the couch. We didn't say anything to each other. But I knew at that moment that I betrayed her trust and the fact that I wasn't the sounding board that she needed at the time when she needed it. That's a form of betrayal. When someone needs you and you don't have time to listen, that's a betrayal. In the lowest point of someone's life, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, financially, and we shut up about bowels of compassion, how dwells the love of Christ in us? When we willfully choose enemies of our friends, of our family, that hurts. Think about divorce cases. That's a lot of time that's usually a messy situation, but some people feel like they're betrayed. But there's always that's a leading cause for messy situations afterwards of betrayal. People feel that they're betrayed. Jesus was betrayed, but yet he still called Judas a friend. I can't wrap my mind around that. Even though he was being accosted, assaulted, arrested, abandoned, he still laid down his life for his friend. Even though he betrayed him. Jesus didn't close the door on Judas. Judas slammed the door shut. Betrayal, when we look at the story of Christ, it's the most saddest situation, but yet it's the most wonderful act of love and persistence. That God's love, that Christ's love for us, was not reactionary. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Betrayal. People can be guilty of us. People can be guilty of betraying us. But let's never be the ones who betray Christ. Let's never be the ones who betray one another. Let it be said of everyone else, but not of us. Anyways, that's all I got for tonight. Let's go ahead and ask God's blessing on our service and our